foul or the second foul because she got bumped twice on that drive, which sent her into the baseline, which forced her to run into you. If you would have called one of the first two fouls, she would have never ran into you.
Every seat in the building was vibrating with raw emotion, and with less than 60 seconds left on the game clock, the atmosphere inside the arena felt less like a standard basketball matchup and more like a high-stakes championship finale. The legendary rivalry between the Indiana Fever and the Chicago Sky had reached a breaking point. But on this particular evening, the consequences of a loss felt infinitely more destructive than a simple mark in the regular season record books. Indiana was staring down the barrel of a devastating home defeat, a result that threatened to blow apart weeks of hard-earned momentum, unleash a wave of harsh media criticism, and cast immediate doubt over the team's newly established coaching era. The deafening roar of over 18,000 screaming fans echoed off the concrete walls, mixing with the sharp squeak of sneakers on polished hardwood, as the game clock ticked down without an ounce of mercy. Nobody in the front rows was sitting down, and along the Indiana sideline, players held their breath with wide eyes as a dark cloud of panic began to settle over the bench. Indiana had poured blood and sweat into 40 grueling minutes of action, taking punishing hits in the paint, enduring agonizing scoring droughts, and suffering through tactical breakdowns that left their defensive structure looking totally exposed. Chicago had executed their game plan with ruthless physical intensity, trash-talking on almost every single trip down the floor and celebrating every made basket directly in the faces of the home crowd. To anyone watching the screen, the story seemed completely finished. Another bitter defeat that would spark days of relentless talk show debates and toxic online commentary about whether Indiana had the mental toughness to handle real physical pressure. But storylines in modern sports are rarely settled until the final horn sounds, and what was about to unfold in those final 60 seconds would flip the entire narrative on its head and send shockwaves across the entire basketball world. To truly grasp the immense pressure riding on every single possession during those final agonizing moments, you have to rewind to the high-stakes gamble Indiana took when they handed the head coaching clipboard to Stephanie White. When White officially stepped into the lead role, bringing years of elite basketball intellect and deep roots within the state's basketball culture, the hype surrounding the team reached unprecedented levels. But behind the glitz of ticket sales and prime-time television slots lay a suffocating reality. Taking over a franchise that features the most analyzed, heavily discussed young superstar in the history of women's sports comes with a massive, permanent target painted on your back. The fan base didn't merely expect steady progress or respectable playoff appearances. They demanded immediate dominance, high-scoring offensive highlights, and flawless execution in every single crunch-time scenario. Every rotation change, every tactical substitution, and every single timeout adjustment was put under a magnifying glass by millions of armchair experts across the world. Whispers had already begun circulating through sports media circles that White's offensive system was becoming overly predictable, and that veteran defensive coordinators around the league had already cracked the code on how to slow down Indiana's high-paced transition game. A loss to the arch-rival Chicago Sky on home court at this crucial juncture of the schedule wouldn't just count as one tough night at the office. It would be framed by critics as a massive tactical failure by the entire coaching staff. White stood near the half-court line with her arms tightly folded, trying to project total composure to her players. But anyone looking closely could see the reality in her eyes. If her team couldn't find an emergency exit out of Chicago's physical trap, the media narrative would turn vicious before the team even made it back to the locker room. The intense friction between the Indiana Fever and the Chicago Sky was never just a fabricated story designed to boost television ratings. It was an authentic, deeply personal war that began the moment Caitlin Clark drafted into the professional ranks. Every single time these two franchises stepped onto the same floor, the game devolved into an absolute street fight, defined by physical contact, off-ball bumping, and psychological warfare. Chicago's entire defensive philosophy was built around making Clark's life a living nightmare from the exact second she stepped across mid-court. They threw multiple physical defenders at her, hit her with hard screens away from the ball, and delivered brutal fouls at the rim designed to test her emotional composure and physical endurance. Earlier in this very contest, the tension had reached a dangerous peak after a violent collision under the basket led to a heated exchange of words, forcing officials and coaching staff to sprint onto the floor to keep the opposing rosters separated. The bad blood ran deep through every matchup, fueled by personal rivalries, differing play styles, and the immense social media circus that followed both teams everywhere they traveled. Chicago wanted to send a clear message that Indiana was fundamentally soft, arguing that all the media spotlight surrounding Clark was pure hype that would melt away when faced with true, uncompromising physical toughness. They entered Indiana's home court with a clear objective: humiliate the Fever in front of their own fans, ruin Stephanie White's coaching narrative, and prove that relentless physical defense will always reign supreme over flashy long-range shooting. As the fourth quarter bled into its final 3 minutes, Chicago's physical strategy appeared to be executing with absolute mathematical precision. Indiana's offense had stalled out completely, looking completely rattled against a relentless full-court trap that forced painful turnovers and led to easy transition baskets on the other end. Stephanie White had already burned through her emergency timeouts, trying to restore order and establish clear half-court execution. But nothing seemed to penetrate the defensive wall Chicago had constructed around the perimeter. The lead was steadily slipping away, and all the emotional energy in the building was rapidly shifting toward the visitors' bench, where players were jumping up and down, mocking the home crowd, and celebrating every defensive stop like a championship knockout punch. Every time Indiana attempted to run their signature high pick-and-roll action, Chicago's defenders blitzed the ball handler aggressively, forcing panic-driven skip passes to wide-open shooters who simply could not sink shots under intense pressure. The crowd of 18,000 fans, usually a thunderous wall of noise, had fallen into an anxious, eerie silence, the kind of heavy quiet that takes over an arena when an entire city realizes their team is completely out of answers. The frustration on the court was impossible to hide. Veteran players were hanging their heads after missed defensive rotations, and body language across the floor suggested that a painful defeat had already been accepted as an inevitable truth. Chicago was bleeding the game clock on every single possession, grinding the pace down to a crawl and executing their game plan to perfection, while Indiana looked completely shattered. Standing on the sideline, the emotional weight on Stephanie White was reaching a critical point as camera crews zoomed in close on her tense face during a high-stakes 30-second timeout. Rumors had been swirling through league circles all week long regarding potential internal disagreements over late-game shot distribution and offensive play calling under pressure. Was White relying too heavily on rigid, structured play designs when the game demanded individual shot-making, or was she struggling to maintain full control over a young squad that occasionally abandoned discipline when fatigue set in? The defensive scheme was collapsing at the rim. The ball movement had become completely static, and a brutal loss right here would ignite a hurricane of negative commentary targeting her tactical choices. Opposing executives were watching the sequence with intense interest, eager to see if Indiana's multi-million-dollar rebuilding project would collapse under the weight of real late-game stress. White pulled her team into a tight circle, drawing plays on her clipboard with rapid, aggressive movements, while her players stood sweating, gasping for air, and staring back with wide, uncertain eyes. You could hear the raw intensity in her voice echoing over the high-definition courtside microphones. screaming for defensive communication, physical boxing out, and absolute execution on the upcoming possession. But tactical diagrams drawn on a magnetic board can only accomplish so much when a game devolves into pure chaos. What Indiana desperately needed was a single heroic figure willing to throw out the script and take complete control of their destiny. That was the exact split second when Caitlin Clark decided to take the entire weight of the franchise, the coach's reputation, and the ultimate outcome of the game, and place it squarely on her own shoulders. Coming out of the timeout with under 45 seconds left on the game clock, and trailing by a critical 3-point margin, she didn't wait for the drawn-up screen action to fully develop near the wing. Spotting that Chicago's primary defender was dropping back slightly to guard against a drive to the basket, Clark picked up the ball deep in her own backcourt, accelerated directly into the teeth of the defense before they could set up their secondary trap, and pulled up from a ridiculous 35 feet away without a single moment of hesitation. The entire arena seemed to freeze in time, while the ball arched high through the air, hanging beneath the rafters while thousands of nervous fans held their breath in absolute silence. Swish! The ball ripped through the bottom of the net with a crisp sound, tying the game instantly and causing the entire stadium to burst into an explosive, ear-splitting roar that shook the structural steel of the building. But the real drama was only just beginning, because Chicago quickly gathered the ball out of the net and pushed it rapidly down the floor, desperate to deliver a heartbreaking response before Indiana could set up their half-court defense. Clark, reading the floor like an elite chess grandmaster, anticipated a risky skip pass toward the far corner, threw her body across the floor with complete disregard for her own safety, and poked the ball loose into open court. The stadium erupted into total pandemonium as Clark scrambled back onto her feet with breathtaking quickness, scooped up the loose basketball, and charged down the floor with under 5 seconds showing on the overhead display. Chicago's defenders were sprinting backward in absolute terror, crossing their feet and flailing their arms wildly to prevent a clean path to the rim without committing a costly shooting foul that would decide the game at the free throw line. With 2 physical defenders collapsing inward to form a wall inside the key, Clark pulled off a breathtaking behind-the-back dribble at full speed, creating a tiny sliver of operational space right at the free throw elbow. Instead of taking a contested, low-percentage jumper over 4 outstretched arms, she executed a brilliant, calculated pump fake that sent both defenders flying uselessly into the air, completely compromising Chicago's entire defensive shape. While still suspended in mid-air, she delivered an unbelievable, lightning-fast pass through a microscopic gap in the defense, directly to an open teammate, cutting baseline for an easy, uncontested layup, just as the red light flashed around the backboard. The loud buzzer echoed across the arena, signaling the end of the game, and the entire Indiana bench stormed the hardwood in an uncontrollable explosion of pure relief, rushing toward Clark to celebrate one of the most insane late-game turnarounds ever witnessed in modern sports history. Chicago's players stood frozen near the baseline in total, stunned silence, staring at the scoreboard in absolute disbelief, as if they had just been robbed by an impossible trick. The fallout from that single, breathtaking final minute didn't just preserve a single win on the regular season schedule. It radically altered the entire trajectory of Indiana's season and delivered a massive shock to the rest of the league. Within minutes of the final whistle, video clips of Clark's deep three-pointer and her game-winning assist went viral across social media platforms, accumulating tens of millions of views and becoming the top trending topic across global sports networks. During the post-game press conference, Stephanie White sat before reporters with a broad smile, openly acknowledging that while the winning sequence didn't strictly follow the play she had originally drawn on the whiteboard, having a generational talent with world-class instincts completely changes what a coach can accomplish under pressure. All the toxic media speculation regarding team chemistry, coaching capability, and tactical weakness evaporated overnight, replaced by overwhelming praise for the team's mental resilience and ironclad composure when facing total elimination. Chicago, meanwhile, was left picks up the pieces after playing nearly 40 minutes of brilliant physical basketball, only to have victory snatched away by 60 seconds of absolute, unadulterated genius. It was far more than just a dramatic victory in the team standings. It was a loud, undeniable warning shot to every opponent across the professional ranks that as long as Caitlin Clark is breathing, no lead is ever safe, no game is ever finished, and the Indiana Fever will fight until the final horn sounds. Understanding the true depth of this historic comeback requires diving deeper into the technical brilliance of what Caitlin Clark actually pulled off in those final 60 seconds from an analytical perspective. Against elite physical defense like the kind Chicago utilizes, standard play calling often falls apart because the physical contact breaks timing and prevents players from reaching their designated spots on the floor. Chicago's strategy all evening was to force Clark to catch the ball with her back to the basket, or push her so far away from the three-point line that she couldn't initiate normal offensive flow. Most young guards in that position would have turned the ball over or taken a heavily contested, low-percentage shot out of pure desperation. But Clark's elite spatial awareness and vision allowed her to identify a subtle defensive flaw in Chicago's trapping rotation that even the coaching staff hadn't picked up on from the bench. When Chicago brought two defenders to trap her at the midcourt line, they left the far corner exposed by just a few feet, assuming no player possessed the arm strength or accuracy to deliver a cross-court pass over two jumping defenders. Clark proved them dead wrong, repeatedly whipping pinpoint passes that forced Chicago to abandon their trap late in the fourth quarter, opening up the space she needed for her own legendary scoring run. This mental chess match going on beneath the physical battle is precisely why her style of play continues to shatter television viewership records and redefine expectations for modern basketball playmakers. Beyond the immediate strategy on the court, this dramatic final-minute victory completely reshaped the internal dynamic inside the Indiana Fever locker room for the rest of the year. Prior to this match, subtle rumors had been leaked to sports news outlets, suggesting that several veteran players were struggling to adapt to the massive media circus and intense public scrutiny that accompanied every single team performance. The sudden transition from an under-the-radar franchise to the absolute epicenter of the sports world had created immense psychological stress for everyone involved. A soul-crushing loss to Chicago on home floor would have undoubtedly deepened those invisible cracks and given critics endless ammunition to argue that the team was crumbling under external hype. However, going through absolute hell on the court and coming out victorious on the other side creates an unbreakable bond that no team meeting or team-building exercise can ever truly replicate. When the players mobbed Clark on the court after the final buzzer, you could see months of built-up anxiety, frustration, and pressure instantly melt away, replaced by genuine unity and shared belief. Veteran leaders who had previously looked hesitant during clutch situations suddenly played with renewed confidence, knowing that as long as they executed their defensive assignments, their young superstar would find a way to bring the team across the finish line when it mattered most. The impact on Stephanie White's coaching narrative cannot be overstated when analyzing the broader context of Indiana's long-term franchise strategy. Taking a high-profile job in modern sports is often a double-edged sword. If you win, commentators credit the elite superstar talent, but if you lose, the full blame rests squarely on your tactical shoulders. Before this thrilling victory, critics were ready to label White as a traditional coach who was struggling to adapt her strategic schemes to fit the unique, high-paced gifts of a generational playmaker like Clark. But the final minute of this game proved that White possessed the ultimate coaching virtue, the humility and wisdom to trust her talent when the official play calling broke down into